morning, good evening, whatever it is, wherever you are, YouTube. So this is one of our new rider videos coming up. This is going to go through some of the basics of bike maintenance and a few things that are going to help you have a bike that's going to be as nice to ride as possible. It's going to be nothing earth-shattering in this. We're just going to simply have a few little hints and tips, how to adjust your chain properly, tyre pressures, things like that, which are really going to make a big difference to your riding enjoyment. Tyre pressures in particular are one of those things which are much more sensitive on a bike than they are on a car, and having your tyre pressures at the correct values is really going to improve the feel of your bike quite significantly. It's going to make your bike feel more confident, and it's going to make you more confident, which when you're a new rider, that confidence in the bike and the feeling the bike's going to go where you place it will be a huge bonus to you. When your tyre pressures are slightly low, you'll find that things tend to want to run wide, don't feel right, and generally create a lot of problems.
First thing we're going to look at is cleaning and lubricating the chain. This is going to make your gear changes much easier, it's going to make your chain last longer, and it's going to be a safety factor. If you neglect the chain too far, the actual individual rollers can seize, wear very quickly, and eventually snap, and that's obviously a massive safety issue. A flailing chain can punch holes in the crankcase and can even very seriously damage yourself as well as your bike. The last thing in the world you want is your back wheel to lock up because the chain snapped and got caught around the sprocket. That will result in an accident. So chain maintenance is really important. You've got to get the back wheel off the ground. Now, if your bike's got a centre stand like a Honda CBR, that's great, and if it does have one, do not take it off. You really will regret doing so. It doesn't get in the way, it doesn't make any difference, but it really is useful for maintenance. But for bikes like this FZR, there really isn't one. So you need to use this, which is a paddock stand. This is a standard universal paddock stand. It has little cups that sit under the swing arm. So you just have to put it in position, get it roughly where you think you're going to need it. Here we are, just in front of the wheel spindle's good. And it's takes a bit of practice. It's really handy if you can have a second person for this job. Just make sure it's in a position and the cups are facing upwards. Then with the bike upright, push downwards and the bike will lift cleanly out of the way. Let the stand roll underneath the bike and we're home, and we're in a position we can lube our chain. You might need to adjust the bike's position on the paddock stand so that the sprocket bolts actually clear the cups. So once it's on the stand, just give it a pull forwards and backwards, just to make sure you can actually rotate the wheel when it's in position. This one's good to go and we can start cleaning and lubing the chain. There are a number of products available for cleaning and lubing chains. For the actual cleaning, you can buy specialist cleaners, but I just tend to use standard WD-40. Now that's one of the places where there'll be a bit of controversy, because some people say, oh, you can't use WD-40 because it damages the O-rings. In my experience, that's simply not true. The O-rings have been very carefully selected to be a material that really isn't affected by anything. But don't spray it directly onto the chain, because you get it in places you don't want it. So just spray it onto a cloth, make sure it's nice, and it really does do a great job just taking all that built up grime off. Just keep turning. You want to end up with a nice clean chain and sprocket. And the reason for that is not aesthetic, it's because the old chain lube becomes very sticky, and when that builds up, you end up with a layer that attracts dirt, and that is not good, because what happens, that grit then becomes like a grinding paste, similar to the grinding paste you'd use for car engine valves and bike engine valves, and it's going to wear the chain really quickly. Just be very sure that you keep any of these cleaners and lubricants well away from the tyres and the brakes. If you do get anywhere near it, a bit of brake cleaner either on the tyre or the brake will work fine, but it's better to avoid that situation in the first place. This job really wants to be done about once every 3 months in terms of the cleaning, and the lube really just when it needs it. They just use a common sense. If it looks dry, it definitely needs lube, and equally if you see any signs of rust on your chain, it's got to by definition be too dry. A well lubed chain simply cannot rust. It's not physically possible. You'll notice here this link has 2 sort of hollow pins in it. This is called the rivet link. This is the point where the chains split when a new chain and sprockets is fitted to the bike. There is a tool specifically for it. You push the link through, put the front plate on, and then the tool goes in, spreads out these links and makes it effectively an endless chain. If you ever need to change your chain and sprockets, which you will do at some point if you're doing it yourself, This is the best point to split the chain, because you can just grind these heads off. They're ever so soft. Grind them off with a Dremel or a grinder, very easy to do, and the chain will just come apart there quite straightforward. Just one quick tip, you should never ever do this with the engine running and the bike in gear. People have lost fingers that way quite regularly. The next question is, which type of chain lube do you need? There are two main types, and sometimes it's not easy for someone that's not seen them before to really know why you would choose one or the other. There's a chain lube, which is typically it's called a wet lube. This is a very sticky aerosol based liquid, and it goes on like a very sticky oil. And there's also a dry chain lube. Sometimes this is called a chain wax. There's different reasons for choosing each one. Now this Yamaha is used regularly and occasionally may get caught in wet weather. It is our cloudy day bike, so we're going to use the wet chain lube on this one. So once the bike's, give the can a good shake. I tend to just use the chain guide as a handhold, turn it, give the wheel a spin. It does tend to go everywhere a little bit, and go in there, and then again just on the sides of the plates here. So that's got a nice coat of lube. You'll notice I've got a little bit of splatter onto the wheel here. Don't worry about that on the tyre, it's really not enough to be a problem. But with wet chain lubes, they actually contain solvent, and what happens, it goes on quite liquid, and then, well, you can already hear how quiet this chain is. They're going fairly liquid, then that chain lube solvent evaporates to leave a very sticky oil. This is now already starting to go off, but I'd advise leaving the bike a couple of hours if at all possible. And it's also, if at all feasible, a good idea to do this immediately after a ride, because the chain's that little bit warmer and it'll help it impregnate into the rollers. So this lube's now going to just sit here. It will look like it sort of evaporates, but it doesn't. But the problem is it does tend to fling off onto the back wheel. With the back wheel, again, the same thing applies, but the best way to remove chain lube is with your WD-40. So onto the cloth as before, never spray it onto the wheel. Just get your lube like that, and you'll find you take off all this lube, and it's a good idea to do this before the solvent has had a chance to go off and make a mess of everything. Do not get WD-40 on your tyre, you will regret that extremely quickly at your first corner. So while you're here, just check your chain tension. That is about spot on. Now every manufacturer will give you a measurement. It's typically between 25 and 40 millimeters. Choose the bottom of the lower run, just lift the chain up and down. That is about perfect. Also, to check for a worn train, try and pull it away from the rollers, from the sprocket. Like this one, this is perfect. This chain's only done a couple of thousand miles. If you can lift it away and see gaps under the teeth, especially if these adjusters are all the way out, it's time to start thinking about a new chain. After you lube your chain, your next thing to consider is your tyre pressures. Now, it's a good idea to start with the manufacturer's recommended pressure. It's going to be a perfect starting place. But of course, most bikes that the initial riders are going to be riding and beginner riders are riding are typically Japanese. Now, the average Japanese rider is a little lighter than a European rider or American rider, so those pressures might be a pound or two low. Start with the recommended pressure, but don't be afraid to go up by 2 or 3 pounds at each end and see what feels right for you. Don't leave it till you get to a petrol station before you try this. Some of the motorcycle valves, if they're sticking straight up, you might find you can't get a standard garage air line onto them. This FZR has a nice handy 90-degree valve on each end. That's not a standard fit for Yamaha, that's what we've put on here. But it means you can easily get a foot pump on. But if you buy a foot pump from your local auto parts store, the rubber hose means that whether or not you've got 90-degree valves, you'll easily be able to get them on. The straight, rigid ones at a petrol station really might cause you problems. So don't wait until you're out filling up with fuel, because if you can't get the petrol station rigid airline on, you might end up losing a lot of pressure out your tyres and you've got a real problem. So we've cleaned and lubricated our chain and sprockets, we've checked our brakes, and we've made sure we've not overfilled our brake fluid level, and we've checked our tyre pressures. The one thing left to do is check your engine oil level. Now, some bikes are more prone to using oil than others, and Yamaha and Kawasaki in particular do tend to burn a little bit of oil. It's perfectly normal. Hondas tend to be a little more conservative on the oil, partly because of the bore plating process they used, but every bike is going to be different. Now the oil level is normally done by a sight glass, which you find here on this Yamaha, but some bikes still have a dipstick like some of the Honda models. But if you've got a sight glass, the correct procedure is to get the bike upright, so that's either done on paddock stand while you're checking your chain and sprockets, or get someone to sit on the bike and just check that the oil level is between the maximum and minimum markers. Until you really know your bike, check it every 500 miles or so, or every 750 kilometres. On bikes that have a dipstick like the Honda models, the dipstick is designed to be used unscrewed, because it's also the oil filler cap. You unscrew it, clean it off and drop it on top of the threads. Do not screw it back in. That will give you your correct oil level. We discussed earlier dispelling some of the myths, and one thing that you'll be told a lot, even repeated by professional mechanics, is that you should check and top up your brake fluid level. Now, as we can see, this one here on this Benelli is at full and the fluid's nice and clean, but I disagree completely with topping it up. The reason that brake fluid will get low is something's happening. Now that might be that the pads are wearing, which is perfectly normal. As the piston moves out, the pads are going to get thinner as they wear, the pistons move further out and the fluid level will drop, or there's a leak. Now either way, this dropping fluid level is going to be telling you something. This reservoir's capacity between minimum and maximum marks is adequate to account for pad wear. So as the pads wear, that will never drop below the minimum mark and never reach a point where it's unsafe. If you have a leak and you notice it dropping quickly, rather than just topping up, you need to fix the leak and find out where it is. The reason that I think it's a really bad idea to top the fluid up is because if you top the fluid up with low brake pads, when you come to renew your brake pads, as you push the pistons back, this level will naturally rise and it will go past the full and can even hydrolock the system. This then means you can't get the pistons back far enough and you can't get the new pads in. You've then got to try and take some fluid out, which is always a difficult procedure. So no, do not top the brake fluid level up. If it's approaching minimum, check your pads to see they're probably about ready for replacement. If the pads aren't ready for replacement, check the system over for leaks. That is a range of fluid levels between minimum and maximum, and it's telling you something when it's there. So that's about it. Stick to these tips and you'll find your motorcycle rides nicely. It's going to give you more confidence and it's not going to let you down. The other question is, should you use motorcycle specific products? Well, yes and no. For oil, I always use bike oil. The reason being that most motorcycle clutches run in the oil, and motorcycle oil has a special additive to make sure your clutch lasts as long as possible. There is a chance if you use a car oil, aside from doing any other damage, you could make your clutch slip, and that's an expensive repair. When it comes to other factors, chain lube, I absolutely advise using a proper motorcycle chain lube. Some people say to use a chainsaw oil, but it's thicker, it's sticky, and it just isn't designed to run as fast. The speed of a motorcycle chain at motorway speeds is much higher than a chainsaw, so they don't compare at all. Also, there's no difference in the price. And when it comes to cleaning, I don't see any reason to use a specific motorcycle cleaner. I tend to use standard Autoglim Super Resin polish on my bodywork. I tend to use Mr. Sheen or any other type of generic Pledge or whatever type of furniture polish to remove dead flies off the headlight and the windscreen, and also off my helmet visor. Never had any problems doing this at all. The other thing, of course, when you're cleaning the chain, as I mentioned earlier, I find WD-40 is probably the best product out there for removing chain lube. There really isn't a reason to buy an expensive motorcycle chain cleaner. So that's about it. Follow these tips and keep an eye on your bike. Get to know your bike and you're going to get the best out of your biking experience. If you like these videos, do hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll see you soon.